On Point is brought to you by Crow Jamaica.
A very good evening and welcome to On Point. I'm Patria K.
And I'm Dennis Chung.
And we're going to walk you through the show today. Dennis, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm watching the impeachment process in the U.S. And you watch that, and then you watch the Brexit situation, and what's happening with climate change, and you say, boy, can we go lower than what we are now?
Boy, you talk about climate change. The weather girl in me has my eyes set on Hurricane Lorenzo that's out there. It is the hurricane that actually traveled farthest. Ireland is actually on hurricane watch right now from the storm that started out in the waters of the Atlantic going up there. So I certainly have my eyes on that. But what I really have my eyes on is the storm that we're creating in Doha, Qatar at the IAAF World Championships.
I mean, Shelly and
oh my gosh, moments of magic. Moments of magic.
Decas.
I love the fact that there's a diversification happening from the Jamaica side because there were concerns about, the future of certainly the sprinting factory label that Jamaica had for a long time, and to see us medal, quality medals in both the shot put and also the long jump make you think, there's an opportunity for us to take a look at some other
let me tell you something. What is happening in our track and field consistently over the years, a lot of it is really coming from two coaches, You ever think about it?
Big ups.
Two coaches.
Big ups.
Stephen Francis
and Glenn Mills. Big ups to Stephen Francis, who has proven himself as a great coach, not just
excellent,
athletic world beaters, not just track world beaters, but now with what he's done with Gail.
Yeah, I think Stephen Francis is the best. For me, he is the best. Because he has not just produced them one or two in track, but the field events to be winning that. Because Trisha Gay Smith was under him also.
Wow.
He's a fantastic person. I've never met him yet, but my hats off to him. Him and Glenn Mills. I think they've really carried this thing far.
Best in the world, worth their weight. There are concerns, however, though, that when you took a look at the races where we were traditionally strong, the 200-meter males, there were no Jamaicans in that race. Shelley had to pull out of the 200-meter female. Where we were strong, are we losing the talent? Have we lost sight on where we're strong? Because it's one thing to add, but if you're adding and taking away from another area, should we be concerned about track stars
I have a theory on that. Shelley, we know, is 32, right? It's not young for what she's doing, so which makes it much greater. But on the men's side, I remember Usain Bolt, he had a rant recently where he just said that the men were not putting in the work. And if you don't put in the work, irrespective of how talented you are, you're not going to get to that level. And remember that while we are improving, other people are improving also. And that's just my theory on it.
Very interesting. Well, folks, we have a big show for you. Jamaica recently received a ratings upgrade from Standard & Poor's, taking a look at Jamaica's macroeconomy in the show today. Are we really ready to take off? We'll take a look at that.
But first, let's take a look back at some of the top business stories of the week.
At number 5, the US has been given the go-ahead to impose tariffs on $7.5 billion worth of goods it imports from the European Union. This is the latest in a 15-year battle between the US and the EU over illegal subsidies for playmakers Airbus and rival Boeing. The World Trade Organization WTO's ruling will mean tariffs on EU goods ranging from aircraft to cheese come October 18. Brussels has threatened to retaliate similarly against US goods. And at number 4, U.S. clothing store Forever 21 has filed for bankruptcy and plans to close up to 350 stores globally. The chain could close as many as 178 underperforming stores in the U.S., though it will have sales and rent negotiations until December 31. Though Forever 21 is still operating stores and its online business, an expert says individuals who are holding gift cards from the company should redeem them as soon as possible. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for Forever 21 says the company's discussions about U.S. store closures are still ongoing. At number 3, the Bank of Jamaica BOJ says it will be maintaining the policy interest rate offered on overnight balances from deposit-taking institutions at 0.5%. The BOJ says this decision is based on its current assessment that prevailing monetary conditions are generally appropriate to support the achievement of the inflation target range of 4 to 6% over the next 4 to 8 quarters. At number 2, the Jamaican economy grew by 1.3% for the second quarter of 2019 when compared to the similar quarter of 2018. This resulted from improved performances in both the goods-producing industries and the services industries. The Statistical Institute of Jamaica Statin says the positive performance of the goods-producing industries was due to higher levels of output in manufacturing and mining and quarrying. And at number 1 this week, Trans-Jamaican Highway is going public. The government says it will be putting up shares through an initial public offering IPO. Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark says in privatizing government assets through listing on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, the administration hopes to get more Jamaicans to own aspects of the country's productive sector. He says the Trans-Jamaican Highway IPO will be the largest in Jamaica's history. NCB Capital Markets will be the lead arranger.
When we come back, gauging Jamaica's economic pulse right here on Point. Welcome back, folks, to On Point. Now, Standard & Poor's have upgraded Jamaica's credit rating from a B to a B+. Take a listen.
Ratings agency Standard & Poor's S&P has upgraded the government of Jamaica's long-term foreign and local currency rating to B+ from B. S&P has also affirmed the B rating on the country's short-term foreign and local currency sovereign credit ratings. Meanwhile, S&P Global Ratings also raised its transfer and convertibility assessment to BB- from B+. The ratings agency says Jamaica's outlook remains stable. S&P says the ratings upgrade reflects Jamaica's sustained progress in achieving macroeconomic stability and strengthening its external liquidity, which improved the country's ability to withstand external shocks. The ratings agency also cited its anticipated continuation of public sector reforms and the establishment of an independent fiscal council as critical factors to promote sustainable fiscal practices and deepen government accountability in a post-International Monetary Fund IMF standby arrangement environment. S&P says the outlook was affirmed based on the government's willingness to continue maintaining robust primary fiscal surpluses, which will support a gradual reduction in debt and interest burdens and help to boost external reserves. In the meantime, the ratings agency says it also expects the country will be able to maintain its growth momentum with modest GDP growth and that the government will continue advancing toward a more effective monetary policy framework for the central bank, including a more flexible exchange rate. A 2-member team from Standard & Poor's visited Jamaica in May to conduct the annual review.
And joining us now to talk about the S&P upgrade and Jamaica's overall economic health are two newbies. The new IMF representative to Jamaica, Mr. Karim Youssef, and the co-chair and the newly anointed president of the PSOJ, Mr. Keith Duncan. Welcome to On Point, gentlemen.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Got to say congratulations on the completion of a successful IMF program.
Sure.
I'm going to start with you, Keith, because EPOC had a heavy hand in ensuring that you steadied the ship in some of that. Talk to me about that work.
I believe EPOC had a role to play. There was the will. The will was there by both administrations through the first, the Extended Fund Facility from 2013 through 2016. And from 2016 and 2019, with the precautionary standby arrangement, there was political will. The country was galvanized around an economic reform program. EPOC was there in a monitoring role, being very supportive and really ensuring that we hit the targets, we made the policy commitments, and we hit our structural benchmarks. And the criteria, the performance criteria, a big help, the behind the scenes, and not necessarily behind the scenes, but very overt, IMF was right there providing technical assistance, providing guidance, always holding us to account also. So therefore, it was a huge team effort to get Jamaica to where we are today. You know, but it took the political administrations on both sides of the political fence to ensure that we got here. And that shows when we're united as a country, what we can achieve.
Kareem, I'm saying welcome to Jamaica. You are going to be with us for the next 2.5 years, yes, but it's indeed not your first time here.
No, I've been here 16 times. This is my 17th in the last 2.5 years, and I love Jamaica. So.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah. So you would have been able to take a kind of bird's eye view, an outsider's look at what happened with the program. Sure. Your own perspective. On what Jamaica achieved.
My favorite words to use in this particular case is really a Cinderella story. As Keith put his finger on the right spot, I think it's an amazing example of ownership at all levels, across administrations. The level of understanding and appreciation for the amount of reform, the substantial amount of reform that had to be undertaken over 6.5 years, goes from the top policymakers in the country all the way down to the taxi cab driver and the everyday person on the street. It is a true achievement in that regard. If you look at fund programs throughout history, you'll rarely find a situation like this where the level of ownership across all segments of society of the reforms was truly there.
But Keith,
yeah.
Coming back to that Patricia started out with, I mean, here we are now, right? Where would you say we are now in relation to where we need to be, and what do we need to do? We still need to be cautious about some things, eh?
Oh, for sure. I mean, our debt to GDP levels are down to 90-odd%, and that's significantly ahead of where we were 6 years ago, coming from as high as 147%. That's all good. We are running fiscal surpluses, meaning that we are earning more than we are spending. That's all good, so that is being reduced. However, so the economic reform program is on track. However, growth still eludes us in a real way. We're still hovering below 2%, 1.5% on average. However, there is growth, consecutive growth for 17 quarters. However, there are other areas of the economy that we need to do. We have structural deficiencies we need to fix. Crime is an issue. Access to finance for small and medium enterprises is an issue because they are the engine of growth. So therefore, while we have put in place the reform program, now we need to build on this now to really move our economy forward, to have inclusive growth. And it's the small and medium enterprises that are the engine of the economy, outside of our large corporates, because corporates have access to finance, but what we're not seeing is the access to finance from where we want creativity and innovation to grow, which is our small and medium enterprises. So we know really, and so there's a whole effort over the past year or so, the Minister of Finance with his tax give back to ensure removal of minimum business tax, increasing the GCT threshold. There are a slew of things that have been procurement recently in SMEs to be able to produce, provide 20% of the government, but behind that there's work to be done because there's still a lot of bureaucracy. So if a small and medium enterprise provide services or goods, for him to get through the procurement is a lot of bureaucracy. So there's work to be done behind all of these deliverables.
But Keith, it kind of feels like looking back in hindsight, we're able to explain away things because we started out the last 3.5 years ago with huge optimism.
Right.
We started out with a target of 5 in 4.
Right. And
the conversation from all sectors was this is doable.
Yes.
So what happened in those projections?
Yes,
what happened to those projections?
You know, the official projections under the economic program was like maybe 2 to 3%.
Yeah.
The aspirational target was 5 in 4, and there's nothing wrong with having an aspirational target. But we had structural deficiencies in our economy.
Yeah.
Those need to be dealt with before we can really get to the potential of our economy. And those areas have to be addressed before we can get there. So we started out with huge optimism, yes, because we were on a path. But there is a sobering lesson to be learned that you have to deal with the major issues that we have.
Impediments.
You know, because while we have over the last 20, 30 years, Jamaica has lived from economic crisis to economic crisis to economic crisis. We have finally settled down in that regard. But what occurred over that period is that we didn't strengthen our institutions. We didn't invest in our police force. We didn't give them the tools. We didn't train them to be able to really police effectively. You know what I mean? We didn't give them the capacity. So now we're at a place now where crime is an issue because we didn't strengthen our institutions. Water, when last we built a dam? 40, 50 years ago.
Can we afford to put in those kinds of strengthening of institutions at the risk of where we are now and the economic stability that we're achieving?
We won't risk it because as fiscal space opens up, you have to put in long-term plans to get Jamaica on the right track.
And if you don't do it, you're going to falter. So let me ask Karim.
Karim wanting to comment, yes.
If you can comment on that, Karim, but also within the context of things that were supposed to happen under the program, particularly public sector reform.
Sure. Just let's back up a little bit to the ratings conversation, right? Because that's where we started. If you consider where Jamaica was in 2013, in 2010, we were talking about I think what the ratings agencies call a selective default, or the NDX, right? That we went through in Jamaica in 2010 and 2013. We cannot ignore that the ratings cycle that took Jamaica from B in 2000, in the late 1990s, down to a selective default situation, back to B+. Now today, look at the countries that are at a B+ rating. We're talking about Jordan, we're talking about Ukraine, I think, we're talking about Bahrain. These are not bad neighbors to have. The outlook, as I understand from the S&P and from the ministry's press briefing on the ratings change, was that the outlook is stable. That reflects by the numbers, right? As Keith said, debt going down from 145% of GDP to under 100% of GDP. I think 95 was the latest print that I saw for the first time since fiscal year 2000, 2001. That's not trivial. Inflation has come down from the neighborhood of 12% and above serially to 4%, and we're now trying to get monetary transmission back with some of the SME financing and so on to get it back to 5%, which is the target. Unemployment, it's the lowest historical level that I know of. It's 7.8% of latest print. These are all indications of an economy that is sufficiently stable and that has a profoundly robust policy framework in place. Now, what is the next step? The next step is putting in place these institutions, the Bank of Jamaica Act, the Fiscal Council, to make sure that the hard-won reforms that have brought us to this point are not reversed and are entrenched, right, for the foreseeable future, for forward-looking generations. Now, in terms of what was supposed to happen and what didn't happen, I would turn that on its head a little bit, and I would say, now that you've stabilized the economy, now that you have a robust policy framework to bring you into the future, what you need to do is to think about the structural impediments, the structural constraints that are in the economy: crime, the provision of services through the public sector and the efficiency of that. That's a conversation that needs to be had. Someone told me that a conversation around public sector transformation is necessarily political. Perhaps so, but on the other hand, it is a question of what do we want from our public sector. If you look around the globe, you look at a public sector that is able to not necessarily use as much labor, instead using capital, using technology in order to provide services to the population. Naturally, that creates efficiencies and creates space. Right, creates fiscal space, creates room to work on roads, to work on protecting the population, to protect them from crime and to reduce crime, not just on the end of catching criminals, but also on the ability to reduce crime ex ante, look at the services and the social safety net that allows people to remain in school.
But on that very vein, that's been one of the most difficult things for the Ministry of Finance to tackle. You're talking about a wage bill that's been difficult for them to look at. You're talking about incentives that are numerous and allowances that are numerous. That we got to this place because people weren't able to pay off of the kinds of increases that the teachers wanted, the police officers wanted, and so the spread became wider. How do you narrow that without upsetting the very people that you serve?
I think the beautiful thing of the EPOC experience is that you have to get broad-based support and engagement to have a conversation about what it is that we're trying to do, as opposed to having parallel tracks of the conversation that are happening saying this is what the government is trying to do, and the government is responding saying no, that's not what we're trying to do. It has to be a broader political and social will.
Yeah. On that note, Keith, and you would know more about this. As an accountant, one of the things that I'm always bothered by is the fact that we have not been considering enough our pension liabilities that are upcoming. Because that's a massive problem, isn't it?
Right, it is. I mean, and Kareem knows it well in terms of how that can get out of control. I think over the last couple of years, in terms of the contribution, the pension contributions, and having the civil servants contribute, is a step in the right direction.
But that's just a drop in the bucket to the problem.
In the right direction, yes. But you have to see. I think I think the Minister of Finance and the Civil Service and the government of Jamaica is very much aware of the issue, and I think they're working towards making it sustainable. You know what I mean? I think there was a whole the National Insurance Fund and NIS. There are reforms occurring there that we should start moving that issue and starting to minimize that, close that gap, which is important, Dennis. You're absolutely right.
But again, if I may chime in on that, if you consider the situation in Jamaica and how the characteristics of situations where pensions get into trouble, usually there's not a private capital market, there's not a vibrant financial system. That's not the situation in Jamaica. Now, the key thing right now is to support as much as possible the creation of an asset base, a domestic asset base, that is available for pension funds to invest in, for pensioners to look at towards the future.
And that's an interesting opportunity for the government that they've been taking on. We look at things like Wigtown and the divestment of Wigtown. We're hearing about the highway coming up in just a little while. They're doing an IPO on that. And so we're looking at different kind of models to get average people to participate in the financial conversation. Your thoughts on that?
Well, the capital markets and the stock market and investing in equities, in initial public offers, in divesting and outsourcing of government of Jamaica entities. It's all positive. It's owning a piece of the pie. It's understanding how business works. It's financial literacy. It's people sharing in the profits of businesses. Because I think Jamaicans on a whole need to understand, in order for them to work hard, and they work hard, earn their money, but they have to allow their money to work hard for them also. And it's not necessarily going to work hard in a savings account. You have to have a diversified portfolio of assets across stock markets, across bonds, across real estate. So your money really works hard for you, so that you, at the end of the day, you have a sustainable into your pension years. You do have a nest egg that you have built up, and you're sustainable.
Well, Keith, you are someone who your day job is in the capital markets, right?
Yes.
But your recently acquired job as president of PSOJ, how do you see the role of the PSOJ in helping to build this economy?
Well, we're focused on a couple of areas. We're building on the platform set by the previous administration of the PSOJ on the whole, which is leadership. One, top of the agenda is crime, making it a national conversation and not a political conversation. It's a crisis. We are in a crisis when it comes to crime. Our crime rate is at 47 murders per 100,000, coming down from 60. That's not normal. The average in the Caribbean and Latin America is 16 per 100,000. We have normalized this above 1,000 level of murders a year. We have to recognize and understand that we are in a crisis situation. The same way we're in an economic crisis, and we got together as a country and we're able to stabilize ourselves, have macroeconomic stability, low interest rates. We can do the same with crime, but it takes a national effort to do so. And the PSOJ must stand behind this being a national effort, and minimize the political kind of divisiveness around it.
But Keith, the question is then going to be, what is that gonna look like in a real and practical way? Are you gonna be watchdog? Are you gonna be financier of the projects? Are you gonna be consultant? Should the idea generation be coming out of the PSOJ? We know that the requirement is there for the public-private partnership, but what will it tangibly look like?
Or the past president of the PSOJ, Mr. Howard Mitchell, was calling for a national kind of broad consultation, but it may take some kind of oversight mechanism. So therefore, we have Partnership for Prosperity, that grouping. How is it that they get together and provide that oversight and pull Jamaica together? There in the toolkit to fight crime, you have suppression, which is state of emergencies. You have building capacity and capability of the security forces. I'll be able to investigate DNA, forensic, all of these things. More police, and more, and what I'm saying, the scientific way to really investigate. And then you have social intervention. These are the three prongs of dealing with crime. So therefore, what's that right formula? While you deal with suppression to really take down that murder rate, what are you doing to build capacity so the police and the army and the security forces can really manage what we have on our plate?
So the role of the private sector is to ask the right questions
of our facilitate as much as possible that conversation so we get on the same page. We have heard the Prime Minister say that the SOEs are part of a toolkit which they want to use over time for the next 5 to 7 years, he said. At various places where there are hotspots, where you really have too many murders, you have too many violence producers, take down the murder rate while you build your capacity so that the police can effectively manage the caseload that they have.
But the government's going to be knocking on your door to pay for certain things. They're going to be knocking on your door to ensure that all of your cameras are in the Jamaica Eye network.
That's why we have taxes. We pay taxes.
Yes.
Right.
People are going to be pressing against the private sector and saying, are you willing to put your money where your mouth is?
Of course, the private sector has stepped up in the past and will step up. Everyone has a corporate social responsibility framework, and I'm sure if we galvanize the nation around crime, the private sector will be there leading and providing whatever support that we can. But we need to make it a national conversation, and I think it's just a matter of building trust between all parties.
And crime's already costing you?
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's actually a very, very important point.
Let's pick it up on the other side of the break, that cost of crime to the private sector, to the country, after the break.
Welcome back to On Point. We're continuing our exciting conversation with our new IMF rep to Jamaica and the president and co-chair of the Economic Policy Oversight Committee. Karim, you wanted to come in earlier about the cost of crime to Jamaica, because as an outsider, you're not a citizen yet, but maybe not at
He says yes.
But I keep waiting on that passport. No, look, I think that's an very important issue to consider and to talk about, because the cost of crime to the economy is not trivial. From preliminary analytical work that I've done looks at simply what would happen if we were to cut the murder rate, the homicide rate in Jamaica by half.
What's that finding?
To reach world average. That would structurally increase growth by 0.5 percentage point. Structurally.
Just that act?
Just that act alone. Now consider what the secondary effects of homicides are on families, on the ability of children to be educated properly, to grow in an environment that allows them to reach their full cognitive powers and capacities. Consider the effects of corruption in communities. All of that is unmeasured. So it is not a trivial thing. Now, the beautiful thing is that the structural impediments that have resulted in lower access to finance in many of the communities across Jamaica are much the same that have resulted in the situations that we're seeing across the island. If you were to deal with the SME financing gap, as the IFC calls it, there's this database, the IFC has this database called the Small and Medium-Sized Enterprise Financing Gap. Yeah. They estimate around $2.6 billion US in pent-up demand by SMEs in Jamaica. If you were to deal with that, US, if you were to deal with that concurrently with crime, with just homicides, right, you would increase growth structurally by 1 percentage point. So these are the kinds of things that I think behooves not just the public sector but the private sector to work together in tackling.
And the only members that perhaps smile at this crime conversation are the security firms, and I'm sure they don't smile either, because all of your members, the cost of operations, when you look at their budgets and what they spend on security guards and camera systems and alarms and
not ability to run shifts and to have people work through the through the night. I mean, it's a challenge, you know what I mean? But we can get there, you know. We just need a fixture of purpose, as we had with the economic reform program. We need people. We need the same political will that we had through over both administrations to agree and say this is the way forward, and let us really look to deal with the crime monster and really have to deal with people. So therefore, the social intervention piece, can't stand alone, but it has to be there to provide the young, unattached male with hope. That there is hope for them, that they can start a small business, that they can get trained at heart, that they can get a job. We need to provide that hope, because right now they're not seeing the alternatives. You know what I mean? And we see the success stories when we get to them and we get the ability to change your mindset. What can happen? Jamaican people are resilient, brilliant people, right? All we need to do is just to work on the social intervention piece, work on minimizing through suppression the murder rate, while we build the capacity of the force to really be able to manage what we have.
Because, Kareem, I mean, you coming from outside of Jamaica, you'd have seen many structural reforms take place. One of the casualties of economic depression is that you tend to lose a generation or two of people to productivity. Is not so? And then the other question is, can we truly address our homicide and major crime problem without public order?
There's no doubt that productive capacity is lost when you have economic crisis, when you have public health crises, when you have natural disasters, and similarly in communities across the world, not just in Jamaica, when you have significant crime problems. And that is why it is extremely important to maintain the current climate of good policy frameworks. We were talking earlier about the Bank of Jamaica law, which enshrines into law the way an independent central bank operates. There's a discussion around the Fiscal Council, which is envisioned to enshrine into law not just the 60% of GDP financial fiscal responsibility law in 25-26 for public debt, but also the way a discussion around budgets occurs, which is already, by the way, very advanced in Jamaica. Now the question is, how do you get to a point where you've anchored your policy over the medium term sufficiently in a robust way so that you have room to tackle all of these things, right? You have room not just on the private sector balance sheets, but also on the public sector balance sheet.
Yeah, so
what about the public order issue?
Making over the reform program and making the fiscal reforms and the success we have had, making it sustainable. And that's what the independent central bank will provide, that's what the fiscal council will provide. That is what the disaster risk insurance will provide, ensuring that we have a sustainable framework going forward, that we can, we can continue with our fiscal rules to reduce our debt to GDP, increase the room for the government to spend on these areas where we need support: crime, health, infrastructure, water. All of these areas that we have ignored because we ran a terrible economy over the last 40 years.
So I want to find out how the mechanism will work. 4 entities that are to be at play: the IMF, a central bank that is now independent, a Ministry of Finance, and an EPOC.
Yes.
How will those 4 players work in the financial future of Jamaica, say the next year or 2 years?
Well, for the next year, we know that the life of EPOC has been extended for another year. This is until the Fiscal Council is in place,
yes.
the legislation is in place, and the regulations are in place that embed it. And secondly, and when the central bank the legislation and regulations are in place, then we know they are in place and operational, staffed and up and running. The central bank is already staffed. No, it has the legitimate central bank independence. In other words, they have full responsibility for inflation targeting, for managing inflation. And the Fiscal Council will have the responsibility for looking at budgets, looking at how sound the plans are, the government of Jamaica's budget and fiscal plans are, to ensure that we remain sustainable and we remain consistent with our fiscal rules of taking down our debt.
So the council stress tests the budget? Yes,
man, and they have a technical capacity. EPOC, we're all volunteers. So we're reviewing reports on a monthly basis. The Bank of Jamaica reports in, the Ministry of Finance.
But you're also on the corner too. So
we're on the corner because we have to get Jamaican people engaged at all levels around why this thing is important, that you don't spend more than you earn, because if you don't spend more than you earn, you get into debt and then you get into problem. And so we're saying we have to run a sustainable country, sustainable financial affairs of our country must be run in a very responsible manner.
And how does Kareem and the IMF fit in all of that?
Well, Kareem, you explain that.
Since your audience is, I think much of your audience is a business community, so I'll use business speak, which I'm more comfortable with than fund speak, so to speak. So look, the fund has three main activities. Our core business lines are effectively lending when there are crises, which are programs. We do what is called surveillance, which is sort of every 12 month or every 24 month, depending on the country, health check of the policies, of the framework for the policies, of the direction of the policies.
And how often will that happen for Jamaica?
So the last one was in 2018. The next one, I believe, is slotted to be in March or April 2020. So very shortly. And then the last business line that we spend, actually, that much of fund staff spend a lot of time and effort on, is what's called capacity development or technical assistance. We've been involved in all three business lines so far in Jamaica over the last 6.5 years, because the Article 4 consultations are ongoing even during programs. Technical assistance and capacity development has been ongoing. I myself personally have been involved in at least 3 of those during the program in the last 2.5 years, and that will continue in areas such as the Fiscal Council, in areas relating to developing markets, developing the FX market, developing debt markets, and any other areas that are identified by the authorities. The most important thing is that the fund plays the same role in Jamaica that it does in its 189 member countries, which is a trusted advisor that comes and has a conversation about.
I still have a question. I just want to find out one thing on that whole operations. One of the things that we were able to do well with the IMF program is that across administrations we were singing the same song.
Yes.
How confident are you? How comfortable are you that the kind of progress that we have made, that the kind of structures that have been put in place will withstand a change in administration if that happens?
I believe with the fiscal rules in place, that is enshrined in law, 60% debt to GDP, 9% wages and salaries of GDP. There are fiscal rules. There is a framework in place, a legal framework. There is, a reporting framework is in place. For example, just last week, a new fiscal policy paper was tabled in Parliament, and this is around updating a supplemental budget to see where we are, and recasting projections based on where the economy is. You know what I mean? So therefore, there are frameworks that in place that protect us.
Accountability.
But quite important is the Fiscal Council, central bank independence, and the contingency around disaster risk, and ensuring that we can sustain natural disasters, hurricanes, etc. So we need to make our country sustainable. I think we have a legal framework in place. I believe that when the fiscal rules in place, if you break those fiscal rules, you're breaking the law.
And there are consequences.
Right.
Well, I want to follow, it's something similar to what Patria has asked, but I want to approach it in a different way, because you're the PSOJ president.
Yes, sir.
You are the IMF rep, and it is very likely, high probability, that you both will be here for the next round of elections. Should you start talking to the political people now about how that is going to be dealt with when the silly season comes?
Yes. Well, most definitely. I think you just started the conversation, so we can start signaling it from now that don't get too silly in the silly season. Stay within the rules. Balance that budget, hit our targets, because that's worked for us. We can see. We're able to spend $20 billion on national security last year in building out infrastructure, fixing the police stations, buying the equipment we need, buying the cars that the police need, buying the bikes that the police need, because we have remained fiscally responsible and take down our debt levels. Interest rates have come down. That's why we can afford to spend that kind of money on the things that we need as a country. So we get crime under control. We need to focus on education. We need to focus on health. We need to focus on water. Too much people suffering from water, but because we ignored water for many, many years. We didn't deal with it as a long-term thing. We just fix and do quick fixes and didn't do it. So therefore, in the same way we fix our economy, we need to fix these other areas where we have crises because we never manage our economy well. If we didn't manage our economy well before, we wouldn't have all these other issues.
So how do you deal with the conversation?
Well, it's funny, right? Because I'm Egyptian American, so I have no idea what silly season looks like. No, I mean, in all seriousness, look, I think the beautiful thing about Jamaica, right, at this moment, and the unique thing about Jamaica in this moment is that there is this buy-in that Keith spoke about at every level of society. Once you set up the institutions of an independent central bank, once you set up the institution of a fiscal council, it's going to become very difficult for any national conversation to draw outside of the lines of what is being discussed by those institutions, what is being developed by those institutions in terms of a policy thrust. And that, I think, is the secret sauce, right? If you think about where Canada was in the 90s as far as the fiscal situation. And you consider that once that political will, that public will came into play, it became impossible for decades for any government to run on large deficits. I think that's where we're on the cusp.
And so the future of Jamaica is very much dependent on those measures.
Those institutions.
Absolutely.
Those institutions.
Welcome again to Jamaica.
Thank you very much.
Keith,
thank you.
You have your work cut out for you. A long road ahead, but congratulations. All right, folks, we take a break right here on Point. When we come back, we'll talk some more. Welcome back to On Point. Now, the first supplementary estimate was tabled in the House of Representatives on Tuesday for this financial year, with the government planning to spend an extra $50.15 billion. What's that money going to be spent on? Take a look at the numbers.
The total amount the government plans to spend for the 2019-2020 fiscal year is $853.39 billion. The total increase in the overall budget is in recurrent or housekeeping spending, which is proposed to move from $731.12 billion to $781.28 billion. The capital budget remains the same at $72.1 billion, with some reallocation of funds within ministries. Public debt servicing gets the largest increase in recurrent allocation of $45.49 billion. Among the portfolio areas, the Ministry of National Security's housekeeping budget moves from $24.6 billion to $26.1 billion. The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information will receive an increase of approximately $1 billion, moving its total to $107.5 billion. $1 billion has been added to the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation's $7 $2.26 billion recurrent budget, and the local government and community development ministry is receiving $448.8 million more, bringing its total to $12.1 billion. On the capital side, $5 billion in additional allocation has been made under the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation for spending on construction and improvement to arterial roads under the Major Infrastructure Development Program MIDP.
And our On Point team hit the streets and asked, are you feeling the benefits of a more stable Jamaican economy?
The effects of a stable economy is not necessarily trickling down to the individual persons. And that is where the greatest, while you might see it in the macro, in the micro it is not trickling down to the individual small men. So there's, in some sector you might see that there are improvements, but on the level of the individual man that walks in the street, the individual person who takes the bus, the people that who basically at the middle income bracket is not necessarily feeling so.
No, it doesn't seem that way. The US dollar is keep going, it's not dropping, so I mean there's no positivity in that.
No, I don't feel it. It don't come in my direction.
No. No. Like I don't know, I think like everything just seems like a struggle these days. Like even, all right, so for example, if you're trying to stabilize yourself and you want to go to the bank and, you know, try something, like everything is just so much work. It's so complicated, more than it needs to be. You need to get so much references from this person, that person. So it's kind of difficult for a lot of different people. So, I mean, I can say that there are changes being made, but there's still a whole lot of work to be done, and it's still kind of rough out there.
I don't have a problem with Jamaica economy. I have always survived because I've always tried to help myself. So if it's up, I'll be up too, and if it's down, I'll be down. But I never at any time wait on anybody to help me.
Well, I think that the currency has not been doing very well. I mean, I think we're probably nearing 140 now. So you would think that a stable economy, our dollar would have recapitalized, but it's not. So we're actually seeing the effects of our dollar going down. So that's not good. And if sooner or later, it's bound to result in some level of price increases all around. Also, crime. You would think that better economy, stable dollar would have a greater impact on our crime. Our crime has actually skyrocketed. You know, I've heard more people say in the past year that they're more afraid of just living in Jamaica. So we have not reaped the benefits where crime is concerned.
Yes, I am. Because I'm getting more lunch money.
Quite honestly, I don't know if it's more stable. Personally, it doesn't feel like, because more expenses and I'm not spending any differently. But then again, yeah, more expenses. Everything increased except my pay. But I guess in terms of businesses, they are driving, I guess. But then you look at the industry, you see people getting laid off from work more. So is that really a stability, or people suffering because of it to make it more stable?
Right now, we still the minimum wage, you know, and it no move. We not benefit. Prosperity not reach we. You don't see the big rich man them. Porsche store open now, you know. You just walk in and buy a Porsche and come out. The Benz things turn up, the Jaguar thing turn up. Poor people still feel it.
Yeah, that's good, because this is good, business is good.
Well, that was an interesting one. I know that one was straight up your alley, being the numbers man, being the accountant.
I think that, you know, we've made a lot of progress as a country. I think we have much stronger institutions than many of the Caribbean countries, other Caribbean countries out there. So I think we're on a good path. The only thing that we need to do is ensure that we understand we're not at the finish line yet. And as Keith and Camille said, we need to ensure we stay the path. We need to build the stronger institutions and make sure it's sustainable. Because we're not sustainable yet. You know, we still have a way to go. We still have 1 or 2 generations that really have been lost through the economic crisis that we saw. You know, we have educational problems, we have public order problems. Once we can fix those things, then I think we'll be in a better place.
I love the way that things have become more participatory.
Yeah.
Where all areas of society have gotten involved in the economic conversation. I think that's going to augur well for us in the economic future. So it's not just about government doing what they do, and then 5-10 years down the road, we're kind of dealing with the consequences. And I think one of the reasons it's so important that we have the institutions like EPOC, but also a very strong opposition, is that they can be the harbor shark, they can be the watchdog, they can, before the button is pressed, to be able to spend the country's money recklessly, that people can kind of hold people accountable. And so I think I celebrate that from the IMF program and the role that EPOC was able to play, but also the opposition and also civic society. And my hope is that going forward, we continue to play that role because it's our money.
Yeah, everybody has a role to play. I mean, we definitely need a strong opposition. You know, coming into 2020, it's highly likely that we can have an election next year. So, you know, my greatest fear is that we need to ensure that we don't fall back into the situation where the politics is trumping the economics. You know, we don't want to get back there, or we're going to have a major, major problem.
I know one of the things that I'm happy that happened, and perhaps it is, I've noticed it, the televised PAC meetings, these televised checks and balances and stress testing things that are put on the table and asking questions about the accounts on both sides of the divide and defending the positions that you take, and people being able to sit at home and watch it and say yes or no and write letters to the editor and make comments and call into talking shows, I really think has done us well.
Well, let me tell you something. One thing a lot of people don't understand about Jamaica now. Jamaica has one of the best free press situations in the world, you know, in terms of press freedom. Do you think it's not many countries, even developed countries, people can go on the radio and talk like what they're talking?
And I love it. I love it because it's our country, it's our money, and it's the betterment of our nation. Gotta say thanks to the folks who make the show happen every week. You did it again. Thank you so much to the hardworking crew. Thanks also to the sponsors and you at home for tuning in week after week. I'm Patria K.
And I'm Dennis Jones.
See you next time on Point.
On Point was brought to you by Crow Jamaica.